Welcome back, third grade scientists. This week, we will look at the vocabulary words that you will encounter in this week's lessons in our unit of study, Unit 5 on human senses and movement. Let's get going. We will review together the academic and content vocabulary for this unit of study. We will study word meanings and look at examples to help you understand the work you will be doing during your science lessons this week. Here we go. Just a quick reminder, we will look at both academic and content vocabulary. Remember, the academic words will be found in your questions or focuses for this week's lessons and can be found across other subject areas in school. Your content words will be specific to your science lessons this week on human senses and movement. Let's take a look at some academic vocabulary. One of your lesson objectives for this week will be differentiate between voluntary and involuntary muscles. Let's take a look at the word differentiate. Before we move on, we're going to stop for a moment and think about whether or not we have ever heard this word before and what do we think its meaning is. While studying this word, does it remind you of another word? Can you think of a word that may be embedded in this word that may help you figure out its meaning? If you were thinking of the word difference in connection with the word differentiate, that could help you to determine the meaning of this word. Using root words or words that sound similar to an unknown word can help us to determine their meaning. Let's see if we're on the right track thinking about the word difference in connection with the word differentiate. And knowing that difference means to figure out how something is like or unlike something else. Differentiate is a verb or an action word. Differentiate means to perceive the differences or distinctions between. So here we see the word differences in the meaning or definition for the word differentiate, which means we were exactly on the right track, thinking that knowing the meaning of the word difference could help us with the word differentiate. So let's try it out. If I was differentiating, could I differentiate the sounds between these two instruments? If you heard a piano playing and a guitar being strummed, would you be able to tell which instrument was making the sound? Could you differentiate? While these are both musical instruments, they create very different sounds. Being able to identify the sounds coming from each means that you are differentiating between the two instruments. Now let's take a look at some content vocabulary. Let's take a look at some of the important content words for this week's lessons on human senses and movement. These are some words you will learn about during your lessons this week in science. You will encounter the word muscle, pupil, diaphragm, and skeleton. Before we move on to look at some examples and the meanings of these words, think about whether or not you have ever heard or read these words somewhere before. Can you give examples? Can you explain their meaning? Our first word is muscle, and a muscle is a noun. It is the tissue in the body of animals and humans that moves parts of the body. The muscle is made up of bundles of fibers that move the body by tightening and relaxing. Here's an example or a diagram of all the muscles in the body. Without our muscles, we would not be able to move our arms, our legs, or any other part of our body. Pupil. Pupil is a noun and can have more than one meaning. But for the context of this week's lessons, we are talking about the definition of pupil as the small dark opening in the center of your eye. Light passes through the pupil into the eye. So many of us think that that dark black spot in the middle of our eye is actually closed and solid, but it's not. It's actually an opening that lets light in. So if it's dark, if you're in a dark place, the center black part of your eye might get very wide. And if you're in a very bright place, like in the sunshine, it will get very small to allow just the right amount of light into your eye to be able to see. So here's a close-up of the pupil of an eye. Diaphragm. Diaphragm is also a noun. Your diaphragm is a wall of muscle that separates the chest and abdomen in humans and certain animals. This muscle is very important because it's the muscle that allows us to breathe air in and out of our lungs. Here's an example of where your diaphragm is. So it's right under in between your chest and your stomach. And it's this muscle right here, and it allows the lungs to take in air and breathe out air. So when we're breathing in, our muscle contracts, and when we're breathing out, our muscle relax. And you can actually feel that muscle working if you sit and concentrate on your breathing for a moment. Skeleton. Your skeleton is also a noun. It is the inner framework of the bones and cartilage in the invertebrate animals. Skeletons support the body and protect softer body parts. So skeletons perform two really important functions. They're a protection for all of our important body organs, like our heart and our lungs and our brain, but they also help us to stand up and be strong and be able to move. Without our bones and our skeleton, we would just be like floppy jellyfish. A skeleton is what gives us our strength, supports our body, and protects our organs. These were some really awesome words for this week's lessons. And now that you're familiar with these words, you will be able to use them and understand them during your learning. Keep up the great work. They're great scientists.